For the past few years, we've heard a lot of talk about the border in the news and in political discourse. For most of us, when we hear about the border, we probably think of the southwestern US, Texas, Arizona, and California. But what if I told you the border was everywhere? In your neighborhood in the Midwest, in your community in the Pacific Northwest, in your backyard along the East Coast? You might be doubtful, maybe even confused, rightfully so. Well, a powerful new documentary called Borderland, The Line Within, has opened my eyes to a dark reality that we don't often hear about. And that is the vast reach and scale of the very lucrative and highly militarized border industrial complex, which has a presence everywhere in our country in unsuspecting places and ways. The film also weaves in the stories of individuals as they experience our country's dysfunctional immigration system. Their experiences are harrowing and heartbreaking, but also courageous, triumphant, and powerful. This film is timely, it is urgent, and it's incredibly well done. Today, I'm talking with three of the people involved in bringing Borderland, The Line Within, to the screen. We're shaking things up a little today as we've never had three guests on the podcast before, but I'm excited to welcome Pamela Yates, the film's award winning director, Paco de Onis, the film's producer, and Alex Gil, one of three data humanists in the documentary who helped bring to life these stunning data we're going to be talking about. You do not want to miss this conversation. This is the NILC Freedom to Thrive podcast, powering pro-immigrant narratives, one story at a time. I'm Victoria Ballesteros, Executive Vice President of Narrative at the National Immigration Law Center. Hi, Pamela. Hi, Paco. Hi, Alex. Welcome and thank you for joining us. Congratulations on your film. When
Thank
I
you.
watched Borderland, The Line Within, I literally felt every single emotion there is. You have raised a critically important conversation with this film that is missing from the larger immigration dialogue. How did this film come together?
Well, it really came together because of our concern about the cruel and inhumane immigration policies that had stretched back a long way, but became particularly acute during the first Trump administration. And Paco and I have a long history of working in Latin America, but we really felt it was time to have a critique of our own country and to tell a story of our own country, but somehow connected to Latin America. And that's when we started to look at what could we contribute, what story could we add to the conversation, the national debate around immigration that we felt that would be true to the values. We consider ourselves to be filmmakers who are human rights defenders. We're artists and we're also activists. And how do we bring those two things together? Well, just like a lawyer who uses law to be a human rights defender, we use cinema, the art and beauty and power of cinematic storytelling, to be human rights defenders.
It certainly comes across in the film, and there are two tracks sort of in the film as I saw it that are woven together very beautifully and effectively. And one follows the journeys and experiences of a couple of people, Gabriela and Kaj, as they go through and experience our immigration system. So that's sort of one track. The other track follows the money and the data behind the border industrial complex. And I want to talk about both things. Can we really quickly, for folks who may not know what that is, what is the term border industrial complex mean? What is that?
The border industrial complex is the amount of money in the federal budget, which this year is $25 billion, that is
Billion
spent,
with a B. Yeah.
billion with a B, which is spent trying to capture, incarcerate, deport, and separate families. It's the amount of money that corporations are making often on the suffering of immigrants, on the backs of immigrants. And it's our tax dollars. And I don't think many Americans know about this. So I felt that that would be an important contribution that we could make. And actually, the border industrial complex and the digital humanists, the XP method, is the thread that weaves the personal stories all together. Because what film does really best is give you an emotional experience that you may not have had. But our films also give you a lot of facts. So you can take the emotional and the factual, and together it's a powerful combination.
It really is. It's the secret sauce, I think, that makes this film really powerful. And I want to talk about both things, the human stories and the data. But let's start with Gabriela and Kaj. Pamela, what was your goal, or what was your message with sharing their experiences?
Well, this film took 5 years to make, and a lot
Oh, wow.
happens in the lives of people over 5 years.
Yeah.
Um, what I really wanted to show was that immigrants coming to this country, or people living without documentation in this country, are powerful. They have agency. They have ways of strengthening their communities. They're building networks. They're thriving. And they're also teaching people about their constitutional rights in the United States. I wanted to create a counter narrative to the mainstream media that says that immigrants are victims, that they don't know what they're doing, that they're just coming here for economic reasons. And I wanted to show, I feel like even in the darkest of days, there are always people finding a way forward. And the protagonists in our films are always people finding that way forward. They may personally be experiencing a lot of difficulties and struggles, and certainly Kash and Gabriela are. And they take the audience with them on these very difficult journeys that they're embarking upon. But at the same time, they're exhibiting extremely courageous behavior. And I think that courage is contagious. So when you see Borderland, the line within, you don't leave the cinema depressed. You leave the cinema thinking, I could do that. I could add my tiny grain of sand to welcoming immigrants into this country, just the way that Gabriela and Kash and the digital humanists like Alex Gil are doing.
Yeah. Yeah, that really comes through. There's a sense through, whether it's through Milpa, right, or the Border Network for Human Rights, the two of the organizations that surface in the film as very involved. But there's this whole network of organizers, activists, people who just feel passionate about this, that are involved in building power for a pro-immigrant world, and that really comes across. One scene in the film, though, that really for me drives home the humanity of the people who are going through our immigration system is the hugs not walls scene. Do you know the scene I'm talking about? Can you talk about that?
Sure. Hugs Not Walls was a brilliant idea by the Border Network for Human Rights to kind of do a social and political jujitsu against the Border Patrol. So the idea is that people from Mexico and people from the United States, families who have been separated and cannot see each other, come together in the middle of the Rio Grande River for 3 minutes to hug each other. And what it shows is the kind of love that can be embodied in protest, the love that families have for each other, and what it took them to get to the border to have 3 minutes. But I think it also underlines that love, also underlines the extreme cruelty of families being separated. So you have these dueling emotions going on, and you get to meet many of the people who are hugging their family members. And it really stays with you on a very deep emotional level. So it's both emotional, it's political, it's about human rights, and it's a creative way of political maneuvering.
Yeah, it's beautiful and really effective, and it does stay with you. And I'll just say, Kaj, he comes off, he's so humble and lovely and soft spoken, but boy, is he courageous. He, going through what he went through, needing to leave Guatemala for his own safety, right, as an environmental activist, and needing to flee because of the threats, and just the way that he was courageously documenting his own journey for this film is very powerful, very courageous. And I do want to emphasize that that's one of the things that comes through in this film, is that there is power, right? Immigrants have agency and power, and are using that to work towards transforming our country's immigration system. So let's shift to the data, because I have a lot of questions there. You took a Freedom of Information Act request, right, with and a data from ICE, and created these stunning visualizations. And I'm looking at Alex because I have so many questions these visualizations that really drove home the massive operation that is the border industrial complex. And I'm thinking about these maps, right? The map of the US with little red dots that show everywhere in the country where there's a detention facility, and they're everywhere in the most unsuspecting places. And then the graphic with the little black spikes. I mean, all of that is just, you can say numbers, and I think many of us, or at least I'm speaking for myself, you throw numbers at me, my brain will, go somewhere else. But when you show exactly where, the prevalence of these facilities, it's alarming. And so, and then the billions of dollars changing hands. Alex, were you surprised by anything that you learned when you were going through the data?
Yeah, starting with the sort of geographical extent of the facilities that ICE has access to. The first surprise was, of course, finding out how deep into the United States heartland this infrastructure reaches. And it was actually on day 3 of the project where we had this graphic. It was one of our earliest exploratory graphics. That's the first thing you do when you get a large data set, is you go through this process of doing what is called exploratory analysis, where you just like throwing things against the wall to see, where what sticks, what patterns grab your attention. And when we saw this one, not only were we surprised, we also knew that it was going to be our flagship image, the one that welcomes users to the site. And it was actually, our instincts were right, because this is the graphic that actually was grabbed by the press right away. Wired magazine was the first one to write an article on this data, and AP picked it up, Washington Post and others. And it was this image that communicates very easily to a lay audience that ICE is everywhere, that the border is everywhere. There were others, of course, other surprises. One of the things that we found surprises is in that graphic where we connect ICE contracts to political districts. We were surprised to see how evenly distributed ICE investments are amongst Democrats and Republicans. We didn't expect that. We expected most of the contracts to go to Republican districts, and we were kind of taken aback a little bit by the fact that contracts are pretty much evenly distributed along bipartisan lines.
You talk about some of the contracts, where the money is being spent. Were there any contracts specifically that surprised you? Because I saw a few in the graphics where they're sort of flowing across the screen. There were a few that grabbed my eye, but I wonder if there were any that grabbed your attention.
Yeah. So the data we're working with for those visualizations come from usspending.gov, which get a very detailed description of all these contracts. The data that is sitting in the government servers has something like 900 columns per row, each row representing a contract. And obviously in the visualizations, we just grab some of the most relevant columns to us, including the names of the company, but also the type of services they provide. And something that we also renamed in the process, because the government data uses the NAFTA agreement to determine how to code things. So for example, if a company is selling facial recognition software or hardware, that would be described as electronics. But electronics doesn't tell us much about what's going on. So we actually went through every contract and tried to figure out what they were doing. So some of those companies that we found, surprising companies, we can call them, were institutions or groups. For example, were universities. And universities were selling educational material. Well, that's how it's listed under NAFTA, right? But then we do a little bit of research and try to find out what do they mean by educational materials. It turns out sometimes what that means is that they make immigrants in detention watch these videos about how they're breaking the law. And it's a sort of like Orwellian, scene where you're being, you know how we all get to watch these really boring HR videos, right? But they're watching a
Yeah.
video that is telling them basically, why they're breaking the law and why they must be separated. It's a kind of re-education going on there, which I think adds to this idea that the whole system is based on cruelty, not necessarily on, our limited resources or whatnot, right?
Right. Right. Yeah, it's one of the so again, when I say I felt every emotion, there's anger too when I'm seeing this and seeing how much money we're spending and how cruel we are to immigrants fleeing countries, and specifically right now I'm thinking of Central American countries where historically the US has played a role in destabilizing those countries, right? And creating some of what individuals are fleeing, and they're fleeing to this country, and then they experience that. So Alex, in the film, you draw a line between the border industrial complex and the rise of fascism in our country. And at one point you asked this question: what if we knew the infrastructure that Hitler was building before World War II? What would we do with that knowledge? Can you talk about that? What did you mean by that?
Well, let's talk first about the infrastructure that Hitler was building in the 1930s, so that we get a sense so we can understand the context here. He didn't go straight up to concentration camps for Jewish folks and other minorities. In the 1930s, they started developing medical infrastructure to house people with disabilities. This was part of their effort to purify the nation. They wanted able-bodied Germans. They wanted the strong race to dominate, right? That meant that people with disabilities could not be part of this future that they imagined. So they started building this kind of infrastructure to more or less start rounding up people with disabilities. That's the same infrastructure that was then that transformed into the concentration camps that led to the death of millions of people. Now, in the United States, now we have this infrastructure that's being built up slowly but surely, growing every year around ICE and immigration. Now, when we start looking at our data, we start looking at Obama, and it's already growing during the Obama regime. And it's all driven by this idea that we must fix the immigration system. We must fix the immigration system. Then it's taken by Trump, who surrounds himself with Christian nationalist people and people with extreme ideas like Stephen Miller and others. And then all of a sudden, this seemingly innocuous infrastructure is now in the hands of people who believe that we should expel everybody. In fact, they were using the whole line that Trump repeats now in his rallies these days about expelling 12 million people. He was using similar language back then. And of course, there has been analysis done by experts on the capacity of the infrastructure to be able to enact this massive deportation. And there was an article in the New York Times a couple of months ago that said, but they just don't have the infrastructure yet to do it, to do the whole thing, right? To do 12 million. Yeah. But that was never the point. The point is that you can already do a lot of damage just in trying with the infrastructure that you have right now. You're already going to separate enormous amounts of families, but you're also risk bloodshed on the streets. When the neighbors actually see a family that they love being taken apart in a country that is already really divided, there's a potential there for violence. There's a potential for violence in the encounter between a State Department run by Donald Trump and citizens. He's already expressed that he's willing to have a tough hand, with the protesters. So this is what we meant in our conversations around the project. We were seeing the actual material infrastructure. We were seeing the finances behind it. And we say, what does this enable, and what can this enable? It's different if you attach it to a democratic rhetoric, democratic in the sense of the Democratic Party, to a rhetoric of fixing the immigration system, which just puts a smiley face on these family separations, but it has a lesser of a potential for violence than this other rhetoric that comes from the fascists, right? That's what we meant.
Yeah.
And of course, infrastructure, like I said with the example of Hitler, can be transformed, can grow, or can be repurposed to do some serious damage, like Hitler did.
Well, just if I can get in for a minute, in so
Yeah.
many of these detention centers are actually county jails. So talk about repurposing. I mean, these county jails weren't
Yeah,
built to be detention centers for immigrants, but they've been turned into that, right? And
yeah.
they're a way to funnel immigrants from those smaller facilities to the larger facilities, and then eventually deportation. So it's just a big sort of flowing system.
And
Um,
we always ask ourselves, looking back at history, what did we know and when did we know it?
Yeah.
And I think what we're trying to say in Borderland, The Line Within is, okay, now you know the extent of the border industrial complex, and us, we citizens, participation in it through our tax dollars. And now you know it, and and you know the extent of it. So we must act.
Yeah, we get asked that question at every screening we've done on this 26 city tour around the country. People always want to know, what can I do? What can we do? And we
Yeah.
always encourage them, to not try to tackle the federal government, but to work at the local level. Find out what your representative is doing, what contracts exist. USspending.gov is a resource that anybody can go to and plug in. And we have on our own website as well. We've copied a lot of that information, like you can see the congressional district and how to access that information.
Every congressional district, every representative, and the amount of money as of 2023 that is going to that district and to what companies.
And it's really interesting too, because on our website we also put a form that's host your own screening, and we did it without we had no idea how much it would be used, but it's been enormous, and to the point where we have a map on our website of screenings that have been requested, and that map is starting to look like the map of the detention centers, except it's screenings. It's
Oh, nice.
it's
That's
interesting because
beautiful.
there are these groups, all these small community groups, church groups, immigration rights groups, legal groups are surfacing all over the country through this host your own screening site.
Yeah.
So that's actually becoming a resource, because we have contact information for all of these groups that have surfaced.
That's
Yeah,
incredible.
there's so
And
much
what
we
is
can
your
do.
website? Yeah. What is your website for people to go to?
Our website is skylight.is, skylight.is, and look for
Skylight.is.
Borderland there, and you get there.
And that's where people can get to the map. And where can people see the data? Are those data, the data maps are on there as well? The visualizations?
The visualizations are live and the data is accessible, but the website is a little bit more complicated than skylight.is. If I hesitate to start reciting it. But if you Google torn apart separados, or use your favorite search engine. I didn't mean to do a plug for the Google company there. Just search for torn apart separados. Maybe add my name next to it. You should be able to arrive at the data and the visualizations live. They look. I have to say, one of the things that has been really beautiful about this process of working with Paco and Pamela has been the great pleasure of seeing a data project on the big screen.
Yeah.
And of course, it went through some design touches, something like us academic geeks don't necessarily spend that much time on design. But in the film, these graphics come to life in a way that we can never hope for in the original project. But the hard data is there. The slightly more involved analysis is there for anybody listening in.
Can you talk, Alex, about the other visualization that you did of the country with the black spikes coming out? What was that? Talk about that map. What were you representing there?
So imagine an aerial view, satellite image of the United States of America for the audience listening in and not looking at the graphic. And then you see this series of spikes, black spikes, like needles puncturing the country. The size of those spikes represents the amount of people that get deported from a deportation point. This could be an airport, this could be a bus stop, and all the places at which this is the last place the person being deported sees in the United States, right? We can exit points. Now, one of the things that we try to do there is show graphically, not represent the data graphically, but also putting on our humanist hats, trained in art and history, to connote beyond just simply them showing you the data, to connote this idea of separation, of the country being ridden by these stakes, you could call it, just being stabbed by these stakes. Every time one of these lines grows and the stake grows, we're talking about people. We're talking about people who are losing their wife, their kids, their husband, their cousin, their uncle, etc. That's what we're doing with that graphic. You'll find that kind of graphic sensibility in many of our representations of this data. That's always that humanist sensibility that puts the human at the center, right? So in a sense, a lot of our graphics are not the kind of thing you expect from a social scientist who has very kind of like cold, strict forms of graphical representation. We do a lot more to try to connote that humanity.
I'm glad you explained that, because, sorry, one question we get asked at every screening too is, what the heck is a digital humanist? And did you guys make that up? And so the way you just explained it.
Yeah, I did want to ask that question, because I've heard of data scientists, I've heard of data nerds, data engineers, but I've never heard the term data humanist. And there were in the film, there are three of you, right? Three of you that work together going through the ICE data. So what is a data humanist, and how did the three of you come together? Do you normally work together, or was that for this film?
The digital humanist, data humanist works, but the accepted term within the profession is digital humanist. I did not come up with the term. The term dates back to 2002, 2003, but before we're called humanities computing, this field, and it dates back to the beginning of the Cold War, when people interested in literature, history, etc., started using computers to do our work. So it's an old tradition of people are welcome to search for the words digital humanities, and you'll find a relatively useful Wikipedia article, more or less outlining what we have done. But the short answer of this is basically people trained in the humanities who develop these computational skills. And what happens when we do that is different types of approaches to these data issues, right? So my PhD is in English. I just published a book on French surrealist poetry in the Caribbean in the 20th century. So it's like, this is the humanist part, right? The digital part is the part where I am quite capable of doing data science with the best of them.
Oh, it's amazing. It's amazing.
So many people ask us about that in the screenings too. And I always say, well, in the film, we take you on the same journey that we went on, because we didn't know what a digital humanist was either. And then we started to work with Alex and the X3 method, and we came to understand that not only was it these three, but it was a whole field with conferences with 500 people. And this is a revelation to the audiences, and it was to us too.
It's slowly starting to seep it into the mainstream. I've seen it on the New York Times this year without an explanation. So that's already a positive sign that maybe people are starting to know what this is. To answer your question about the team, so Rupik Arisam and Manan Ahmed were just part of a larger team that worked on this project that involved several fronterizas, also digital humanists, and my dearest Moacir P. de Pereira, who is was at NYU at the time, but then was transitioned to Columbia. all of us immigrants in this team. We lost one person right after the project was done, Linda Rodriguez, who was one of our fronteriza scholars that was working on this. She had terminal cancer when she started working on this project.
Oh no.
And she used the last weeks alive to work on this project because she understood the importance. She was such a great person, though. Like imagine like you just have weeks to live and you're gonna dedicate yourself to work on a project like this and to fight for immigrants. She herself being an immigrant. I
That
still
was one
kind
of
of
my
get goosebumps
takeaways.
just thinking about her. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And that was one of the other takeaways for me was the power inherent in having three digital humanists who are immigrants going through these ICE data and presenting these incredible graphics and just the analysis coming from three immigrant digital humanists was very powerful. Also, another takeaway for me. Paco and Pamela, I know you've been touring the country. You're screening this film across the country. What has the response been from people who come to your screenings?
One of the biggest responses, and it happens at every screening, is this kind of shock at what you experienced, Victoria, too, looking at these graphics and getting an idea of how vast the extent of the border industrial complex and the cost of it. And I've had people who have come up to us afterwards just really angry. I say, I can't believe that guy kicking over the water and I'm paying for him with my taxes. That's just outrageous. That kind of emotion, right? Yeah. Where suddenly you feel like you're paying for this war on immigrants because it's really, for example, those recruitment videos, they're like recruitment videos for going to Iraq or Afghanistan. I mean, but it's here in our own country that they're recruiting people to do that kind of military work. And so all of that is very shocking. And then in contrast to that, also this incredible, they're moved. So many people say, I cried through the film because of the stories with, Kash and Gabriela that they're not tragic stories, but they're very, it creates a lot of empathy because the reason I say they're not tragic is because they actually they have a lot of agency. They're organizing and, they're taking charge. And building political power. So, and Gabriela, in many Q&As that we've had her at, she always tells the audience, look, we're not looking for saviors here. We're looking for allies. What we need is allies, not saviors. And I think that's something that comes across in the film as well.
I've been really struck by how engaged the audiences all are and how after the film's over, they don't leave. They won't leave. And we've even had Q&As like in Tucson, there were 200 people at the screening and we talked for an hour afterwards. The theater was really great, but then they had to start the next film. They asked us politely to leave and still no one left. And so they had to start the next film with the sound up really loud. And that's because this is a conversation. This is a story that we're not hearing around the country. We're saying there is a different way to welcome immigrants into this country. There is a different way for us to have immigration. Immigration is not a problem. We need immigrants. We need people to work and we benefit. We live in New York City and New York City is 25% immigrant and it has been for the last 100 years. Different waves of immigrants, but look at the city. I mean, it is a powerhouse. It has culture. Its economy is doing well. The gastronomy, all the things that we love about New York City is so much a result of the immigrants that live there now and that have passed through there in the past. I think the other thing is that people start to think, after they see Borderland, The Line Within, they start to think about their immigrant ancestors, if you have immigrant ancestors. And aren't they the heroes in the stories of our families? Aren't they the ones that really make up the backdrop and of who we are and how we've thrived in this country? So audiences really connect to that. And I think it gives them a way to also talk about immigration in this very energized political season.
And we're hoping that the film one of the effects it can have, and we're basically planting seeds with this tour. And by the way, if somebody wants to check out the tour, it's on Instagram, Skylight Pics, Pix. You can, at Skylight Pics, you can follow this tour and hear some of the Q&As. But it's basically about reframing the story, the narrative. We feel that the immigrant story should be a hero story, a hero narrative. I mean, these are folks who, they risk their lives to find a better life for themselves and their families, and they help build our country. And, it's really a hero story.
Where can people watch Borderland: The Line Within?
Stay tuned to our website, again, skylight.is, and we very soon we'll have a link up so you can stream the film at home.
Amazing.
And that's going to happen as soon as we finish the tour.
And we're just finishing now a really great study guide to go along with it. So if you're a high school teacher or a college professor, or you want to lead your community group in studying the ideas in the film, that's available also for free.
That's incredible, because this film, Borderland: The Line Within, does serve as a call to action. And I think that's why people don't want to leave the theater, because there's a sense of, what can I do? How can I get involved? And that's a beautiful thing. There are a lot of people in this country who believe in our shared humanity and in our interconnectedness, and will get involved. We just have to reach them. So everybody, go to skylight.is and watch Borderland: The Line Within. Pamela, Paco, and Alex, thank you so much for your time. Congratulations again on this important work, and I wish you all the best.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Victoria.
Victoria.
Thank you, Freedom to Thrive.
I want to thank our listeners for spending time with us. For more immigration truths, visit us at NILC.org and freedomtothrive.com. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. I look forward to continuing this conversation with all of you.